All right. Well, hang on. We are entering our final stretch here, but we have an excellent panel for you, our second to last of the day, on the imperative of winning the strategic competition with China. And we have a great panel featuring Sarah Ladislaw, founding director of the New Energy Industrial Strategy Center. Jim Bougalis, CEO and founder of North American Iron. Ryan Fedasiuk, fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And Chris Johnson, president and founder of the American Energy Leadership Institute. Please welcome our guests to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're here to talk about China. We are specifically talking about not just how to compete with China, but how to win. So specifically thinking about not just the policies that we need to implement. I think we've talked plenty about that in this conference today and yesterday, but how do we execute? How do we get things built here in America that we're going to need? How do we turn ideas, which we have myriad of, we can tell from the folks who've talked at this conference, but how we get stuff actually built and how we actually execute. So, like I said, we don't have an ideas problem. We have an execution problem. So I just want to ask you broadly before we get into it, how do we convert those ideas into reality? How do we convert our advantages as Americans into reality vis-a-vis China? So I want to start with Ryan. You're a resident China guy, and so I would love to just know, if Xi Jinping were in the room right now, what would worry him most about the United States?
Sure. Thanks very much, Chris. And I want to preface by saying I focus a lot on AI. I think we're going to cover a lot of ground in this panel between energy and industrial supply chains. But in the software stack, the United States is just light years ahead, at least in terms of frontier capability. I think Xi would be worried about what American AI labs are capable of achieving. And China's system is behind. They can't have enough computational power. And even though they do succeed at energy, the United States has caught up in other domains. And we are catching up, thanks to the people in this room, in energy as well.
Right. Sarah, I want to ask the same question to you from your perspective. You're trying to build more energy, more manufacturing here in the United States and with our allies. What would Xi Jinping be nervous about what America uniquely does well vis-a-vis energy?
I think there's a lot about China that realizes that the United States is the most energy advantaged country on the planet, right? They just came from a very different position, and they have been the ones that have tried and, quite frankly, successfully caught up to build their own energy advantages. I think the thing that, they're concerned about is fundamentally Chinese overcapacity, and the way that they run their domestic market is why they sort of flood the market with all these clean energy technologies. And what the United States and many other countries are doing now is saying, we don't really like that too much. We don't want to cede that control over critical inputs to what makes us, competitive economies, what allows us to drive, industries of the future. We don't want to cede that anymore. And so we're going to take back that ground. And I think the mechanisms by which we're going to choose to do that are the things that are probably most concerning at a strategic level. But quite frankly, over time, it's our job to just make it very clear that this is going to be the reality going forward, and we're going to try to make that work.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah. I'm really glad we have this panel, just because these guys are the experts on this stuff. They're actually doing the work on the ground. If you're not unfamiliar with my organization, I always say we're not a think tank, we're a vibes tank. So I'm the vibes guy today. So this is great. But Ryan, I want to go back to you on the AI question, because you're talking about the software stack where we're having the advantages there. In AI, where do we risk falling behind with China? Where's the biggest challenge where we're seeing them actually gain advantages over us?
It's a really good question. I think it's worth considering 4 dimensions of the AI competition between the US and China. There's frontier capability, there's national adoption, there's international diffusion, and there's a contest to make our societies resilient to AI's disruptive effects. I think in terms of frontier capability, as I said, the United States has a decisive lead of about 6 to 7 months, depending on how you count it. And frankly, I expect that gap to widen. It's going to take a lot of computational power to build and run the kinds of systems that are starting to come out in 2026 at scale. But in terms of national adoption, China's got some advantages. It's a core priority for the Chinese Communist Party. They're building structural incentives, and local governments are offering compute credits and making it easier to build and install computational power. In international adoption is really the race that we're maybe going to fall behind simply because the token economics of running an open weight Chinese model are so much better than that of the United States. The real question is who is going to have the energy to run inference operations for AI services at scale? And this is unfortunately an area where China is ahead of us, at least in 2026. And in terms, finally, of making our society resilient to AI's disruptive effects, I think the United States has some enduring advantages. We're able to adapt more easily to some things that might go wrong.
Yeah, and I think we've been talking constantly in this conference about how we get energy on the grid, how we get more built, more factories, more power plants, more infrastructure, more everything. So, Jim, I want to go to you on that. I mean, you're in industry. You have a pig iron mine project in Minnesota and North Dakota. You're actually getting stuff built, and you've seen up front the challenges there. Can you kind of tell us what the perspective is on how we're building things, how easy it is or how hard it is to build things in the United States from somebody who's actually trying to do it?
Well, yeah, I guess this is kind of an easy question because, the real challenge is regulatory, regulation. I mean, that is the number one, let's call it roadblock, hill to climb with a project, at least a project like ours. We're taking iron ore from Minnesota, which we have such an abundant amount, and we're making iron from that to feed our U.S. steel industry. Our U.S. steel industry has transformed since the 80s into an industry that uses our own scrap iron, but then uses foreign iron to make the steel that we use. And we talked about China a little bit earlier here. Just to give you an idea, we make 100 million tons of steel a year. China makes 1 billion tons of steel a year. Part of that billion tons, they try to sell it to us, and we buy it. We still buy it to this day, while having so much iron ore in our country, right? So I think, short answer, that's the biggest problem is regulatory. Right. Everything else takes care of itself. Of course, we can make our iron more economically than we can shipping it across the ocean, but the regulatory pitfalls to do that are really the leading issue.
Yeah, this is something that I've been interested talking to you about over the past few weeks is how the assumption is that because if we're not building something here, if we're not using a certain technology, if we're not if we don't have the supply chain, it must be because it's cheaper to do it elsewhere. And that is clearly not true, especially in the iron and steel that we're trying to build. And it's got to be untrue for a lot of other things. But we do have to get rid of some of these regulatory roadblocks, especially, I mean, you can talk a little bit more as well about this, where these regulations are the intention, the stated intention is to protect the environment, reduce pollution, all that kind of stuff. And we are clearly seeing projects that would be better for the environment than what they're replacing. We were seeing energy that's ever cleaner, ever better for the environment, and produces products that also help protect the environment and crowd out dirtier competition from China, Russia. The pig iron that we get is currently from Brazil and Ukraine. Much dirtier economy. So I just wanted to make that point, kind of before moving on. But talking about the sort of strategic dependencies that we have on a lot of these countries because of these supply chain issues, what sort of is the next strategic dependency that we won't address in Washington until there's a crisis? Sarah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, we haven't addressed the ones that we have, and we've had crises. So, I think we have a bigger problem, which is we like things to be efficient and we like them to be inexpensive, and that's the way we've run our economies for a very long period of time. We have now done a few things, which is we have realized that we do care where things come from, that we do want to build things here, and that we need to both make that easier and cheaper to do, faster to do, get out of the way of companies who are trying to do it, but also still keep the faith of the communities that we're working in, that, their interests are being protected as well. That's an age-old story. But then also, quite frankly, trying to figure out which things you do and don't care about, right? So everybody can recognize, Undersecretary Helberg was here, talking about Pax Silica. We're going to reinvent the multilateral order based on this AI economy that we're building. But 90% of, what we actually need to be doing in this country right now is making sure we can just get the transmission system into a place that it functions. And that bores people. Yeah. And the incentives in the industry.
Maybe not this audience.
Not this. You guys are special. But it really is one of those things where it also isn't one of those things where you flip a switch and you say, oh, I fixed NEPA. What's that now?
Right.
No. I mean, it's way more complicated than that. And what it really requires is a mindset shift, which has been, a really wonderful thing about this conference, which is, if we want to do this, it's a national project. Like, these are things that we have to say, we're proud to build these things here. We're proud to work with our allies and partners to do it. And we're not just saying we're going to do it this year or next year, or this administration or next administration. It's like 10, 15 years, right? We are invested in making ourselves into builders again and to be able to do these things. And I think it's that we know that we have critical mineral and rare earth issues. We know we've got, issues across the board. I think one of the things that we need to be paying attention to is just the capacity to both build and innovate at the same time is something we haven't dedicated ourselves to in a long time. And that's what we need to do. So I know it's a little bit of a general answer, but.
No, I think that's great because I think what I've run into, I'm often, on cable news and when I'll be on Mornings with Maria on Friday, and I'll be talking about this stuff in much broader terms. But what I'm trying to do, and what I think a lot of folks here are trying to do, is tell that story, tell a better story. People understand this stuff in narratives. Are they going to want to get into the intricacies of NEPA and ESA and transmission lines? Of course not. But if you talk about an opportunity to make America a place where we build things again, things that matter, iron and steel, nuclear power, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, all of it, in a way that, President Trump, when he's doing the Make America Great Again thing, it's not that, he doesn't think America is great. It speaks to this nostalgia of there was a time in history where America built things here, had supply chains here, created good jobs that people felt like they were part of a national project on. And we can bring that narrative back. We can bring that kind of story back. And it's conferences like this that I'm just so glad that we're having, because that's how people have got to understand this. And then, yes, we're going to have to get into the weeds. Yes, we're going to have to do the intricacies of permitting reform, and thank God, SPEED Act and stuff like that is happening on the Hill. But yeah, that is exactly right, that we just need a new story. In terms of potential crises, Ryan, I would love to hear any strategic vulnerabilities that might be too boring for people in Washington to be paying attention to, and how we can sort of build it into a better story, a better narrative.
So I've got the hard question, the doom question. Thank you so much.
AI guy. I had to do it.
I know. But seriously, I mean, I really agree with what Sarah just said. It's about really getting the boring things right. And even more than that, I think, picking up on what you're saying, it's about correcting misinformation and meeting people where they are, right? Mm. I mean, just to win any of the 4 dimensions of AI competition that I laid out, we need 2 things. We need electricity in this country, and then we need devices that turn electricity into tokens, period. And so with both of these things, with building more facilities to generate and transmit electricity in the United States, or to build data centers that are needed to build frontier AI and run it at scale for inference operations, unfortunately, there are a lot of narratives out there, and Americans are pretty worried about putting either of these kinds of facilities in their home communities. And I think it's about trying to educate Americans are trying to tell them, hey, this is the future of innovation for your community. This can do a tremendous amount of good, and meeting people where they are is really the key. I also think that, unfortunately, this is something that the CCP recognizes. There have been a number of reports recently from the Bitcoin Policy Institute, and even from some of our leading AI labs, indicating that they are detecting malicious actors in China using AI platforms to generate misinformation about data centers' energy consumption, to try to spread this narrative in the United States that this has deleterious economic effects, that this is going to ruin the environment, that data centers are going to use up all the water. We know that many of these things are not true, and we have plans to deal with them. And I think trying to communicate that message really is the thing I'm really worried about and could imperil American leadership in the AI race with China.
Yep. And it's not just the AI race that these kind of narratives are going to hurt us on. I think we I always say that, if we're going to struggle to build data centers, which have really limited environmental impact, they use energy, but we can make energy cleaner and cheaper than basically ever before. A lot of these challenges are meetable. We can fix it. And people are still getting that NIMBY instinct. And a lot of politicians and elected officials and regulators are getting skittish. You see people talking about data center moratoriums and that kind of thing. So if we're not able to build data centers, reindustrialization is never going to happen. So, Jim, I would love to go to you just to see the kind of story that you're telling folks in the communities that you're in, just how the opportunity that is there. And when people are coming to you with concerns about the project or its impact in the community, whether it's economic or environmental, what's the story that you're trying to tell to folks where you're building?
Well, let's go back to the last question. I'll kind of morph it together with this one, right? So you look at steel. Everything in our lives is steel. It either has steel in it or it takes steel to make it, right? An AI database center. What's the core of the database center? Steel. Right? So, we talked about a crisis. The steel industry has been in a crisis for the last 20 years here in this country, and if you look at the tariff amendments in 2017, the 232 tariff amendments really focused on steel, and our steel industry was really in a bad spot. We were very reliant on other countries for our steel needs. Now that 232 helped us, but it takes iron to make steel, and what happened was the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It was a perfect example. 60% of our iron was coming from Russia-Ukraine. And a lot of you should remember what happened to the steel industry back then. The prices went to the moon. Everything was in chaos. We are in a much worse position now. Right now, 75% of our iron comes from Brazil. The other 20% or so comes from Ukraine. So something happens in one of those countries, we are all of a sudden out of steel. Right? We have no capability to make our own steel any longer. That's a national security problem. It's a problem for every American. Think of the pricing. Think of everything that goes along with it. What I just said earlier, everything and anything has steel involved. Your jacket to that chandelier to this table. Right. So that's the real issue with iron is iron and steel. It's very important, right? It's as important as energy as well.
And that's a great story. When people are talking about impacts to their community, obviously you want to talk to those concerns, but there is a national security component where I believe that most Americans are natural patriots. They see an opportunity to reshore these industries and build the stuff that we're going to need. I mean, we've talked about the defense implications of iron and steel quite a bit.
You look at that, the defense portion, our project has high purity grade iron. What that means is that high purity grade is used to make those specialty items. The last 5% of the military, the last 5% of your vehicle, those parts that are much needed that without those parts, the rest of the vehicle or the rest of the military can't be built. Right. And we're counting literally. We are counting on our adversaries to get that material. Right. So it's so nonsensical the position we're in right now. What makes it even more nonsensical is that we have the material here in the U.S. in abundance.
Exactly. So let's say hypothetically, we've talked about all these policy reforms that we need to make. The permitting reforms, the regulatory reforms, the investments in infrastructure and transmission, and critical minerals, and all these things. Let's say, hypothetically, basically the energy imperative slate passes. It's just everything's perfect. We live in this perfect eternal world of energy abundance, at least on a policy level. What becomes the next problem? What becomes the next bottleneck that limits our ability to build what we actually need, assuming the policy environment changes in such a way that the policy isn't the issue anymore? What's the main, Sarah, I'd love to hear your opinion on what the main bottleneck would be there.
Okay, so 4 things. The first is, if we build everything that we say we want to build right now, it's going to be colossally expensive. Right. Because that's the way the world works, right? So this is, it's not to say we can't do it. It is just to recognize that we say affordability matters, and yet we want to have an industrial revolution in the country. 10 years from now, that could make everything less expensive. Between here and there, if everybody is building out the same stuff, it's going to drive up costs. Like, we can't wave a magic wand and make that go away. So we are going to have to figure out how to calibrate some of that, how to respond to some of it, how to build out capacity. I think this is where allies and partners are helpful, right? Because not everybody is going to build everything quite at the rate and pace that we are. So we do need to think about, what needs to be built here, what could be imported here, how to make this affordable for the American public so that we don't drive up costs. That's not to say it's not necessary. The other stuff, which is, in my mind, having worked on these issues for 25 years or so, there's three things we have to do that are going to be really, really hard. One is to prioritize. What exactly do we mean by reshoring industries? The whole thing? 20% of it? 50% of it? Which ones? Which part of the industry? Full supply chain? We can't afford that. So which ones and at what expense, over what time frame? I'm not talking about having a planned economy. Just, every administration should probably just think about toggling which parts of the industry they care about. This is very true in the steel industry. We go through, where in the supply chain do we actually care about owning or having capacity? How much of that capacity is good, bad, or indifferent? The other one is learning, right? So the last, ever since COVID, and we've tried to reshore industries, we've learned that we're not that great at some of them, and we're going to have to get better. And that means policies that don't get passed once, then they adjust. If you don't need a subsidy anymore, give it up. But if you need some more R&D, let's tweak that. Our politics doesn't lend ourselves to that, and that's just a little bit too bad. So those three things.
That's great. And on, the planned economy thing, I mean, that's what China has, right? They do these 5-year plans. They have a really limited regulatory and permitting environment. Basically, if the state says go, it's going to happen. And you have all these people in these companies that jump in and do whatever is in that 5-year plan. It often leads to overcapacity. That leads to them dumping. Steel is a great example of their dumping. So Ryan, I would love to hear, what uniquely about the American way of doing things, the American system, what we are better than China at, that is going to give us the advantage over a planned economy, while still knowing exactly what Sarah's talking about how we're going to have to prioritize, we're going to have to relearn how to do this. What about our system helps us beat that?
I think the United States is really good at adaptation. We're really good at innovating our way out of whatever bottleneck it is that we are facing. And so we're going to figure out, to Sarah's point, industries where we have to dominate. We have to be the world leader in producing whatever widget that is, so that we can maintain some sufficient amount of national comprehensive power. We're also going to figure out industries where we can delegate, where we can rely on friends and allies and partners to carry some of that burden for us, so that we don't have to make every single T-shirt in the United States, but we can import perhaps some transformers so we can have a serious energy build out in this country. And that there are going to be industries, I think, where we can tolerate some amount of Chinese success, or work with our friends and partners to trade in an equitable way. And figuring that out nimbly in a way that isn't dictated from the top, that is emergent from the depth of our capital markets, is really something that we have historically succeeded at as a country. And that is, I think, the reason why the United States remains the global leader in $1 trillion AI build-out.
Well, and that's why it's so vital not to just get rid of the permitting process or get rid of all these regulations, but make it predictable, make it, a way that capital can look at a project, know when it's going to be built, know when it's going to start pulling in revenue, going through the process in a really expected way. That's, I think, where we can unleash a lot of capital that's probably sitting on the sideline right now. If we're honest, there is a lot of liquidity out there. I mean, we're seeing $1 trillion IPOs happening. There is a lot of money out there if they think that there is a plan for this project to be successful. And often the limiting factor for a project being successful is the permitting process. And I know we're running up on time, but just wanted to get a few closing thoughts from you guys. Let's say we're having this conversation again 10 years from now. I know. A lot can change, especially in AI. So this is especially fun for Ryan. But what would you have to say it would have to be true for us to have continued to reindustrialize, to do all the things that we need to do to strategically not just compete with China, but win? What is the one thing that you think happened that was the most important part of that? Sarah, I'll start with you.
One thing? That's not fair. So
I'm the moderator.
I mean, to be very candid, over the next 10 years, I think the one thing we're going to have to do across the board, and I'm sort of getting into your territory, unfortunately, is learn how to apply innovation into our manufacturing investments, into our supply chain investments much more readily, right? It's got to stop being about AI is over there making funny cat videos, and we have a facility over here manufacturing something the way that we did in the 1950s. That is not the ride that we're about to be on. It has got to be about, we're going to take the sharpest thinking and we're going to put it into our industries and we're going to drive them forward. And it's a partnership, right? It has to be a partnership between government and industry, not a planned economy, not any of those things, just a partnership.
Well, Jim, I'll go to you on that. I mean, the partnership between government and industry, I know you guys are going through the process now. You've had to permit, do all that kind of stuff. There's, capital financing, that kind of thing. I mean, what's the one thing the government can do to help industries like yours?
Well, help us along, right? I'm against, if you take away all the regulation, we live in a capitalist country. It'll figure itself out. We'll do enough work. We'll have the money. We won't go past the money. Everything kind of works itself out. If regulation leaves our industries, that's what we're here for. So go back to World War II, World War I. Those times we innovated huge amounts compared to what we're doing now. And that's the reason. The regulation wasn't there. If you take it away, then we're free to innovate. We're free to build quickly. We're free to impress other countries, ourselves, and move forward. That's the real.
That's great. And Ryan, we're about to get the hook soon, so pretty quick answer here.
There's one thing that I think will determine American success, and it's optimism. It's moving past a fear-based approach to novelty and new technology. I mean, the reality is we can believe and acknowledge that things are moving fast and things are getting weird. By my definition, the singularity is here or coming very soon.
Right.
And I don't know what the world will look like, but I know that Americans have a tendency in their blood to embrace change with full hearts and clear eyes and figure out what's going to be the best path for themselves, for their families, and for the country. And I think that if we have that mentality, then we'll succeed.
What better way to end it than a line from Friday Night Lights? That's phenomenal. But yeah, we've got a better story to tell, and I'm so glad folks at this conference are wanting to tell it and go out and fight the good fight. So thanks so much, you guys, and thanks for having us, everybody. Thanks.